This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And it's Dave on the board.
Interesting week. Lots of things happening. Tuesday I had various alternatives. One was Ron Slater was going to come and herbicide, but he has some arthritis, and it's getting to be that some of us are getting older and we can't lift 2 gallons of water to do herbiciding of teasel. So we had to postpone that. The Natural Area Study Group was going to Welland, which concerns me a lot because that whole corridor along Route 10 is of major consideration. It ends in Weldon Springs State Park, and which connects with the railroad bed to Clinton Power Plant Lake. So that's sort of a field trip I would like to join and say something about the potential for that trail. But there was also a Nature Preserves Commission meeting, and we're very concerned about 30 miles of railroad bed, Old Penn Central bed, wind prairie I think they're calling it, but between Paris and Decatur. The Department of Transportation, Department of Natural Resources bought the bed partially for a bicycle trail, but they're kind of slow doing that, and 11 sites were acquired by adjacent owners, so it sort of disconvolvulated the railbed trail concept. But there's a lot of prairie on that corridor, and so I felt that the most important thing to do was to go to the Nature Preserves Commission meeting in southern Illinois and just say something on behalf of the wind prairie. So that's what I did. And there are other things happening. There was a plant sale, which is very good, and the hyacinths are blooming on Lake Park and at Seymour. The hoary cocoon is blooming, along with starry-eyed grass. These are places you should see. So I headed south. I didn't go down 57. I like to go down through Decatur, and on the way to Decatur, I check out the railbed we own between Seymour and White Heath, and then on the other side of the Railroad Museum between Monticello and Cisco. So I run through the little towns of Argenta or Oriana into Decatur, and it takes a while to filter through Decatur. And then to get to the other side of Decatur, Booty, and on down through little towns to Raymond, and then you join up and you get on to the 55 and head south to Belleville. I like to take off before I get to Belleville, and on 159 it goes straight through Belleville, which is a little slow since they're widening the main street of Belleville, so it's a little slow. But then when I get further south, get on to 154 going west to Waterloo, and very nice rolling country with wheat coming to head. It's still green, but not too far from harvest. Behind some of it is development, but you often think of southern Illinois as not being as rich as northern Illinois, and didn't have quite the same glaciation, and but still very healthy farmland. I got to Waterloo, and I might make a comment on the way that the road basically follows through Taylorville, follows the railroad bed. That's how things worked out. Okay. The railroad looked particularly sterile because it's been maintained recently and probably a little bit of herbicide there, but the two tracks follow all the way down to Raymond. Okay, let's look at the Nature Preserves Commission. It's a 9-member board, part appointed by the governor, part elected, and its mission is, I'll read because I think you should know what its mission is. It's I'm very fond of the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission because they do a lot of very good work. The mission of the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission is to assist private and public landowners in protection of high-quality natural areas and habitats of endangered and threatened species, in perpetuity, through voluntary dedication or registration of such lands into the Illinois Nature Preserve system. The Commission promotes the preservation of these significant lands and provides leadership in their stewardship, management, and protection. And that sort of is led by a director who has been Randy Hydon, who's just retired. And of course, nothing is being replaced at the moment with difficulties at the state level. But there are 3 categories they put their work into. One is protected lands, a nature preserves directory, maintenance guidelines. Then there's an INPC process, identification, protection, stewardship, and defense. And defense is often very real because people will put power lines on territories that have been preserved and things like that. And then there's administration, the rules of the game and commissioners and agents. There's about 9 different regions out there. And here's another statement which I think deserves reading. Protecting nature's treasures. A tapestry of nature's treasures is protected in Illinois by a nationally acclaimed program called the Illinois Nature Preserve System. From the Cache River basins, cypress swamps in the southern Illinois to the beach dunes along Lake Michigan, many of our state's most rare natural areas are protected as nature preserves. These last remaining remnants of our state's natural heritage are almost all that is left of the way the state looked early in the 1800s. Today, less than 1% of the landscape remains as it did when first seen by Illinois settlers. Permanently protected by state law, nature preserves are private and public lands that have rare plants, animals, or other unique natural features ranging in size from 1 acre to more than 2,000 acres. Nature preserves protect tall grass prairies, oak groves, sandstone bluffs, wetlands, bogs, and Illinois wilderness, which provides home for endangered species like the prairie white-fringed orchid, the prairie chicken, and Illinois chorus frogs. Without this protection, many of these exceptional areas would be lost forever. Currently, nature preserves protect over 900 occurrences of endangered and threatened plants and animals. In fact, more than 20% of Illinois' endangered species are in state dedicated preserves. So I know quite a few of the board members. One of them is George Covington, who David also knows from visiting the Illinois Prairie State Conservation Coalition. And Bill McLean, who's written books on how to burn prairies and do a whole bunch of things. These are people that sit on the board and ask questions of the agents that are presenting situations. We're sad to be losing Randy Hydorn, who's been director for a long time. So he has a lot of knowledge there and probably will be consulting as a result, especially since there is no replacement for him yet. There are 9 regions throughout the state, and those people report in and bring a particular site, perhaps, often, and that presentation is adjudicated. Questions are asked. It may be that if this site is not fully detailed, then might go back for another submission later, but it's a very friendly process. 2 of those biologists have been together for 25 years, and they were awarded or recognized for their efforts. And one was Stephen Byers, who's up in the northeast corner of the state. I always enjoy his presentations. He does a lot of work. And John Nelson, the same. I think with the Illinois, the Natural History Survey for a while before that. But both give presentations that make you aware of what they're presenting and the reason for preservation. I know other people who are regional officers. I talked to Angela Moorhead, who's on the western side of things. She has been working with the North American Prairie Conference to sort it out. It will be in Bloomington, and it will be a major, it's a biennial conference, and it runs for several days, and it is so close that some of you who are interested in prairie should be there. They're going to celebrate Peter Schramm, who initiated this prairie conference, and it's on July the 16th through the 20th. So if you're interested, put a note for that time. But just talking to Angela, she's been documenting the species that she preserves by photography, but detailed photography. She's just bought a ring flash which will allow the photography of small creatures and get depth of field and things like that. She likes to do it in nature and not have a specimen in the lab. You might do both, but she's especially interested. And often when you take photographs, you don't necessarily have to keep the photographs. Just making the photograph makes you more aware of the creature you're looking at, especially if it's enlarged and get access to it. But Angela's been working for a long time too. It was interesting that George Fell's name came up. One presentation by Nelson was that they have a very small gravel prairie, and it goes back to George Fell's father. And it's interesting that George Fell himself has passed for 20 years, but he's still there. His spirit and philosophy is there. He put together the Nature Conservancy. He put together the Illinois Institute, Research Institute in Rockford, and it's called the Land Institute. And his work with those things was a little bit controversial because George was kind of on the pushy side, and he did a lot of good research, and sometimes got a little more powerful than was thought necessary. But so one of the board members that I was sitting with was asking me, "Do you know George Felton?" And I said, "Yes, surely." I did field trips with him. It was very helpful, and I enjoyed his reign. But it came up in the discussion of I think it was something like an acre and a quarter, a very, very small piece of, mightn't even be that big, of gravel pit prairie was added to another gravel pit prairie, and it was in a way a memorial to the Fell family. George started out his activities by blocking an airport runway that was going through a prairie, and so that's when you start to find George getting criticized for his activities. In our own region, Mary Kay Selecki, who most of you that are in Prairie know, has retired, and so there was a resolution in recognition of Mary Kay Selecki, and I'll read it. The Illinois Nature Preserves Commission wishes to recognize the leadership of and contributions of Mary Kay Selecki during 26 years of service as a Natural Areas Protection Specialist and field representative for the Commission upon her recent retirement. During her tenure, Mary Kay was instrumental in the permanent protection of 35 nature preserves and 22 land and water reserve areas, and encompassing approximately 5,000 acres. Mary Kay's contributions to natural areas conservation are many and varied. In addition to working with the landowners, including protection of First River Nature Preserve, she took the early lead in the development of the Illinois Nature Preserve Commission's vegetation management guidelines and helped draft the rules establishing the Register of Land and Water Reserves. In recent years, in the absence of Natural Areas Protection Manager, Mary Kay provided feedback to staff on protection proposals, serving as a trusted advisor to her colleagues, other staff, and commissioners. Her moderate and calm demeanor, while providing her thoughtful position on contentious issues, is her hallmark. Mary Kay's continuing commitment to and advocacy for Commission's programs will be greatly appreciated, while her legacy of land protection and stewardship will continue for generations. And those of you who go to the Grand Prairie Friends meetings will encounter Mary Kay and her husband, John Taft, and they are a powerful pair in this effort to preserve things. I talked to another woman who is from the Field Museum. She is working on bees and the value of small household plots of bees preservation sites in urban areas. And just the enthusiasm was interesting to me. And she was talking to a board member at the same time. And this is the sort of thing that makes these meetings helpful. You have an interaction, and you get to feel that you're not the only one trying to do some of these things. I asked her, she's relatively young, and asked how she was able to do some of this work and have family too. She had 2 sons, and she said, it's been rather wonderful. Not only she enjoyed her work tremendously, but she's also been working with people who've enabled her to have 2 children and continue to be a part of the whole event. So just those little conversations back and forth are interesting. The administrator, the secretarial side of the organization was there, and I talked to her too. That's a very essential piece. She has been working with water and then came to the natural history side of things, but she obviously has a skill in the subject matter she's dealing with and the secretarial duties that she performs. I've been reading some of the minutes from past, and one of the things that interested me was a Degonia canyon and cave. It's a site on the far west side of the Mississippi River. If you go down that area, it's limestone, and so you have caves. And these caves in the past have been the subject for pirates that would steal from paddle wheelers coming upstream, and their sites were often in caves. Well, this wasn't the case, and the board member was straightening me out. This was a cave that's further inland. It's hard to get to. You're warned if you join a field trip to it, it'll take 4 hours for the field trip, and you need to be fairly healthy to get there. And this cave, often those caves house the like of bats and creatures that we don't know much about. And so I asked her if she would be coming to the North American Prairie Conference. She said, actually, probably no, because so busy trying to work with this particular cave. We were near the Cahokia Mounds, which have been recently considered as a monument. They are listed as a world site with UNESCO, so, but there's development all around, and I think that the attempt is to give it some status. It's a mound building society. At one time had many more people than you would have in London, and we have little mounds all the way up. Allerton Park has mounds, Nettie's Heart Woods has mounds, and these are part of this mound building group of people, and we don't know all that much about them, so it's good to have that sort of heritage looked at. I came back via the expressway. Seemed to be the thing to do. I have responsibilities here that mean that I should get away quickly, but I soon got off it because I enjoy the sights along the way. It's slower, but it's really a different way of traveling. I like the back roads, and even if it's slower. I stopped off at a cemetery at Taylorville, which looked interesting to me from the roadside, and the funereal art was excellent, and a lot of history there. And I wonder, what was Taylorville? I think it was a mining territory, and I will be looking up on Taylorville to see what its history is. There was a nice little trail, and I took photographs of it. It was obviously a railroad line that had been installed to a trail. So that's my story about the Nature Preserves Commission. I like to think of it as a body politic that has a general board and a people who operate with it come to the general board with their ideas and needs and presentations. I tried to institute that with the Kickapoo Trail because I felt that its involvement with the farmers adjacent that were wanting to reclaim the land, the interaction with the public required more than just a forest preserve. The forest preserve is tremendously sympathetic and interested in prairie and things like that, but I just was wanting to have something like this 9-member board with a CEO in the middle and then associates, just the way some WEFT has associates that come to the board with a concept. Didn't happen. The trail is in the hands of 2 forest preserves, or the Forest Preserve in Champaign County and the Conservation District in Vermilion County. But so the Nature Preserves Commission becomes a model for me for doing things. On the way home, I went to land invasion sites at Weldon and the land. I was interested to see whether they had been planted yet in an invasive manner. Fortunately, it rained, and neither sites were planted yet. So I've been to the engineers and legal people who are they've prepared a survey. You can't take out a court injunction against these invaders unless you have the area surveyed. The police won't work with it unless they have that sort of detail. It's taken us a while to get that, and it's still in process, but I'm hoping. I was very pleased when it rained yesterday because it keeps the farmers off the invasion. And I've even-mindedly, I've often wondered whether I should take a 3,000-gallon tank of water out there and spread it on our land.
Or just learn how to do a rain dance, or hire someone to do that for you.
Oh, you can do that. That's an alternative, is to arrive on site with 3,000 people and balloons and make a statement. It's called a flash crowd. And if you get enough people concerned enough about what you're doing, that can be very effective. At Weldon, for instance, the farmer is a different caste than the village. The village likes to use this corridor that we have and on a warranty deed, which is a very good ownership. And so you may have to make some statements. So how do you do that? And one of the ways of doing that in other places has been to have a flash group go out, or to take a bunch of musicians and play on the area and make a statement. But most of all, survey and a statement about the nature of the warranty deed is very important. It's also very costly. It may take $15,000 to initiate and finalize that sort of challenge. But if you don't do it, then the possibility is a domino effect. That if this farmer does it, then the next farmer can do it, and the next farmer can do it, and so on. And they don't realize that what we're doing is trying to preserve the genetic gene pool. So it comes up for grabs that we need to get this preserved in various ways. And so I came back at dark after having checked out the sites. This week the farmers' market went outside again, and the mall was full of sales. Grand Prairie Friends prairie plant sales, and bonsai sales and horticultural sales, all doing very well. So I'll say a little bit more about that, but perhaps we should say this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Still Dave on the board, and I forgot to mention this at the top of the hour. This is May the 8th, and this is a program, you may have figured this out at this point, but I'll go ahead and mention it anyway, that this is a weekly program talking about conservation and the environment and anything else Dave wants to talk about that's going on in our area and pretty much the rest of the state.
So, Grand Prairie Friends, there's a lot of people there that know their prairie and there was Bill Hanley giving advice on the weeds. I was asked what these weeds were or what these plants were they part of the nature? And really, when you're presented with a few leaves, it's very hard to identify. So, but Bill was good at it, and so the lady that was there to create a prairie was getting some comeuppance about what the plants were. One was snake root, and I forget what the other one was, but they were both not essential prairie plants. The bonsai people were there, and one of them has been a person who worked with the hardware store, and I know him well. And then another one was a ringler. And where did I know the ringler? Oh, yes. He comes from Strawn, which is over there by Gibson City. And he has a brother who has a steelworking thing. And the brother is into things like golden seal and growing golden seal, which comes out of a forest, and he puts salon over to give it some shade. And he's also into prairie, and his daughter is into prairie. And so this was the uncle or the brother. And so I got to learn what the daughter, who was interested in biology, has now got two children. And so just that conversation and the handshakes and the fun about talking about bonsai plants is interesting. The bonsai fellow who from the hardware store is now working with the university in I think a sustainable type program, and he knows his biology too. So an interesting retirement type job. The Hort people, there was Simon Rosenzig, and he and his friend Beth were in my reading the landscape class at Parkland years and years ago, so we often have conversations. They kind of remember one thing we did was I took the class up in a small plane to see what the landscape was like from the air. And in order to do that, we took a door off the plane, which was a little disturbing because you're only held in there by a seatbelt. But we took Beth up. She is in a wheelchair, so that was a little different for her. And that whole session, we would often put her in the back of a pickup truck so that she could see what we were seeing in the field where you couldn't get with a wheelchair. But anyway, we know Simon, and I chatted with him for a while, and I met with all sorts of other people who are involved. And that is what farmers markets and these sorts of sales create. And I encourage you to be out there and involved. I talked to Jamie Ellis. I'm a little discouraged by the Grand Prairie Friends because we spent years putting them into action, and it was mainly to have an organization that did prairie preservation. And they've tended to morph into forests, often very disturbed forests or forests that have been invaded by weed trees, and it's allowed them to become trust people, and I think they have something like 700 acres now. But really, the more difficult task is to preserve prairie, and Grand Prairie Friends hasn't really done anything with original prairie, not the reconstruction prairies, but the original prairies that need to be preserved. We're down to 0.0. 1%, and that's very little, and you have to be doing things with railroad beds. So I'm concerned because we have, I have to meet shortly at Monticello with the city manager and the team. We're wanting to discuss what we do with bicycle ways. One of the problems with bicycle ways is that they get to be recreational sites, and recreational people don't always want to be interested in nature. So there's a sort of a gentle conflict here. There's also, I'll be going tomorrow morning to this meeting, and we also realize that if you're doing bicycle ways in Monticello itself, you don't necessarily think about the other side of the fence, Decatur or Danville or Clinton. How do you think about bicycle people like Kevin Elliott riding across the country and wanting to stop off at a spot like Allerton Park? Well, we have worked with the city of Monticello. They've purchased easements, conservation easements or rail trail easements from us, and established a really nice mile-long trail on the western side of Monticello across the Sangamon River. And then it was popular enough that they've extended that by another mile. And at the moment, there's a Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program grant possibility. So we're thinking to either use that to take a limestone surface trail to a concrete surface trail or asphalt if possible. Or it might be to extend that trail another 4 miles to Armenia and Cisco, right past Allerton Park, where we have had, we're not sure we still have endangered Massasauga rattlers. And the university has been interested enough to take 1 mile of cornfield and 66 feet wide and create a new prairie alongside the old one to encourage these creatures. Not everyone wants to have to deal with Massasauga rattlers, but this is an eastern Massasauga. It's not one that's going to be aggressive. It frightens the bejesus out of construction people who don't want to encounter them, but they're fairly quiet, and you could almost sit on them without too much problem. But they do come out, and they like to move along corridors that are damp to water. And we've had a real debate about a road cut there. We've put a snake corridor underneath it, but the snakes are so shy that they won't use a concrete corridor like that. But to put a road cut through is something that challenges the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission all the time, because it's very easy to look at a bunch of weeds and want to put a road cut through, and what's the problem, you know? But if you're wanting to have a corridor, it's not the world's greatest corridor. It's you can put a fox on a corridor like that, and it can eat all the Franklin ground squirrels. The better preservation sites are large sites, like at Manhattan, Kansas, where you have thousands of acres, and then you can have the ecosystem expressing itself. So this is not the best, but this is all we have. And so we're talking about this 4 miles that goes from where there's a new library, and bless me, right opposite where we have purple gentian and beautiful prairie plants, a Monsanto subunit. So we're working at it, and we hope that we might be able to put in a request for Illinois Transportation enhancement program. We would hope that groups like the Grand Prairie Friends might join us, that the university might join us as part of Alton Park, and that it would be a joint effort. Sometimes joint efforts work better than not, and sometimes individual things do work too. We often get the question of who's the we? Well, sometimes the we is one person with a whole bunch of other people tied on. It's not necessarily a formally created group. What we did with spinning off the Grand Prairie Friends was to create a group that would have the formality, but we retained some of the we. And if you go back to Gleason, who came here early and documented all the prairie sites that were around, which is the information has gotten lost, Gleason was doing it by himself. Many of the people who have been promoters of preservation, Charles Kendi, Vestal, and these people had archives that are considerable, but we haven't always had archives preserved effectively. That's why we're working with the Amana Free Library to preserve some of the details that we get. But often some of these things start with a small group, and you could probably tie on hundreds and perhaps even thousands of people who have been involved in this sort of thing, but not necessarily in a very formal manner. The formality eventually helps. So we're talking to Monticello and the Grand Prairie Friends. Now, we have a little time left. 15 minutes. So I want to say that Market Street has changed. The city doesn't really appreciate our what you would call them, plants planted in the street. Market Street has some character. It's like you couldn't put Chinatown into Michigan Avenue or create a Michigan Avenue through Chinatown. It's very difficult for the city to define what Market Street is. It's interesting that I was the other day collecting cans, and a couple came through, and they had met, and they just married that day. And they're coming back to Market Street to see where they had been, and they'd been in a little pocket prairie and knew it well. And it just, that sort of spirit, the number of people who get married here or are in the street in photography, the old buildings, the character of the street, there's still bricks underneath it, and the street is cracked, so you can know that street bricks move, the concrete doesn't move, and that bothers some people, but it is very interesting to others because they know that this is a alive and breathing part of the street. The sidewalks have been widened, so we can put tables out there for restaurants, and but I would like to put plants out there. So I'm asking if we rate to rent 2 feet of space to put plants there and some other artifacts. But there's a safety reason. We have to applaud the people who do this sort of work and make sure that buildings don't decline. Right. And that's sort of a thing that we also encourage, and so we have to meet that sort of dictate. If you come by Weft, you'll see that the Tiffany-era planters that were outside have disappeared, and that's logical. There's not necessarily other people to take over this sort of thing. That's the beauty of what we do, is that the people come past will often do things in a different manner. I enlisted some of the people who visited the little prairie to lift plants across. That was interesting. Susan Taylor has been in contact with Girl Scouts, and she thinks that they might be able to enjoy working with our things, and I think that's that's not a bad idea. So on Friday, I spent most of the day flagging hyacinth plants. What happens when you have early spring herbs on the prairie? They're usually small. Starry-eyed grass, just about 6 inches high, with a tiny little white flower the size of your little finger. The hyacinths are about 9 inches high, and very shortly they will be covered over by other plants. And if you don't flag them, you have about mine and Buckley's chance of finding them when they go to seed. And so you have to have people who might be able to wait 3 weeks and collect seed from those two plants. And it's close. It's on Lake Park, and it's only about 2 miles south of town, so people can get there. So we've been talking about not only people seeing these plants in flower, but having them collect seed. What else did I do this week? Oh, I collected a box out of a dumpster, and lo and behold, it had about 4 dozen eggs in it. They were all shelled, and this is an amazing amount of protein. It just indicates that restaurants don't have any compost opportunity. So how do we encourage the city to have a compost facility and have a lot of the materials that just go to the landfill at fair expense? So eggs are interesting because eggs also highly proteinous, and they are often used to allow bacteria to grow if you're doing laboratory research in a petri dish, and eggs will give the petri dish an opportunity for the bacteria to grow, and you can tell what the colonies are, you can tell what bacteria you have. So they're also a little dangerous because you can have what is often called a kissing disease, and I forget what mononucleosis. Dave looked it up on the web, and yes. So I've been steadily cutting these up and putting them in the toilet so that they go down to the sewer plant where they will be fed to bacteria and fungi. But it just indicates that we could do something with 30 restaurants that have a lot of waste food. David thought it'd be good to have a hurling system with them.
Well, I was thinking about it. Yeah, you could get a bunch of volunteers, and just as you've got them helping you out on other things with plants out in the, say, Lake Park, just give each of them a dozen and have them chuck them out into the. I presume that wouldn't be too bad. There must be animals out there, and if they were too off, I guess you might be poisoning squirrels or rabbits or something like that. But yeah, it just seems, again, composting of sorts.
Also, somebody came around the corner and said, "Monk, come for a beer." And I said, "Well, I want you to help me pull out chairs out of the dumpster." So 2 office chairs with bad wheels. Wheels are a problem. People get hair in the wheels, and the wheels. You can also get a little hacksaw, and you can take out the hair, or you can put them. Caustic soda will remove the hair, but people don't do that. Some of these wheels had flat sides because they'd been used as a non-wheel chair for so long. So I happened to salvage wheels. So I had 5 wheels to replace, and now I've got an office chair that's like probably $65 or $70 chair, and there are 2 of them. And then there was a bunch of regular chairs, and the seats were pretty dilapidated, but I looked at them and I thought, wow, this could be reupholstered. And so I put them aside, and I'll ask Laurie Coy if she might want to reupholster these chairs and reuse them. Otherwise, both chairs, the office chairs and the more simple chairs, can be disconvolvulated, and there's 5-8 pound of steel there, so they shouldn't be gone to landfill. But there was also a heater, oil heater for a room, a barbecue facility. There was 3 water jugs, which you use. You pay for them to bring you water in them, and so I called up that company. They came and picked those up. It just boggles my mind what goes into the dumpster from time to time. I want to say that very shortly we will have an electronics recycling facility at Parkland College. You have to go past Parkland College up to Duncan Road, and it will be on May 21st, and it will be from 8 till 12. I have a question for them, because I have an old vehicle, and as you sit in that line with 75 people lined up to dump stuff, I tend to boil. So I would suggest that they put people in a parking lot and give them a number and call their number, so they don't have to sit there for a half hour with their engines churning and wasting and polluting the environment. I have a different thought about that. So remember that. Dump and Run is coming up, and Dump and Run is where the university takes all those dumpsters that traditionally have been filled with computers and bicycles and God knows what all, and they get them recycled so that they can students can come back and reuse that sort of stuff in the spring. So Dump and Run is coming up. I don't know the exact date, but it's in the vicinity. Students are leaving town. Kim Campbell of the B Band came and helped me get a couple of television sets out. We're in a situation of television sets being obsolete, and you can't recycle those ones that have backs on them these days. So you can recycle you can go to Habitat or Goodwill. They'll take a flat screen, but not the other. And so this recycling that's on the 21st, we'll get some of those things. I think that probably gets me, but we're very near the end. It's a time of year when a lot of little things are growing. Where we burned, the prairie is coming back, and I had our videographer, Joseph, lives near Lake Park, and he wanted to report to me that our prairie had been destroyed, but I had to tell him that prairie we burned it, and it is coming back, and he should be over there looking at the hyacinths and the starry-eyed grass and enjoying it. And I think he will. He must have been over there to find out that it had been burned. And so this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. And let's see here, we've got about 1 minute to go before the top of the hour. And so just enough time to remind you that the views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and nobody else.